I never imagined my life would begin to change on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where the city feels gray and tired, and you drag yourself from one hour to the next. My name isn't important yet. What matters is that I've been a math teacher for 12 years, and still, most nights, I go to sleep wondering if I've failed not only myself but also the students who pass through my classroom like shadows. Teaching doesn't pay the bills. Not in this city. Rent devours half my salary, and the other half vanishes into my father's medicine, the bus tickets, the second-hand coats that keep out just enough winter to keep me alive. That's why, when the school bell stops ringing, I become a tutor, moving from apartment to apartment with a worn satchel of notebooks and an old calculator whose buttons stick like they resent me too. I never choose the clients. The agency sends me names, addresses, times. Usually it's a shy boy with parents who glare like accountants waiting for their investment to grow, or a girl who doodles stars in the margins while I try to explain fractions. Nothing ever surprises me anymore. Until that Tuesday. The email was short: new student. Evening sessions. Address attached. I didn't recognize the neighborhood. When I looked it up, my chest tightened. It was one of those districts where the streets shine because someone polishes them, where the houses are not houses but fortresses with glass facades that reflect your poverty back at you. I told myself there must be a mistake. The agency never sends people like me to places like that. But the name was correct, the time set. I almost didn't go. I almost sent a message saying I was sick. But pride is a crueler hunger than an empty stomach. So I put on my oldest coat, the one that still smelled faintly of chalk and rain, and boarded the bus that wheezed its way past districts I had never even dared to enter. When I stepped off, the air itself seemed different, quieter, heavier, as though even the wind respected the price of the land. The address led me to a mansion framed by wrought iron gates and lanterns that burned like small suns. I stood there for a full minute, feeling ridiculous, a poor teacher clutching his satchel in front of a palace. The intercom buzzed after I pressed it, and a voice, cold and professional, asked my name. I gave it. The gates opened without comment. And just like that, I was inside a world that was never meant for me. The driveway curved like a question mark toward marble steps. I counted them while I climbed, afraid that if I lifted my eyes too quickly the whole illusion would collapse. A maid opened the door before I could knock, her expression unreadable, as if she had seen too many strangers tremble at the threshold. "This way," she said simply, leading me across a hall where the chandelier was larger than my entire kitchen. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to turn back and run. But then I remembered the unpaid bill tucked in my pocket and followed her. The room she left me in was spacious, with tall windows and shelves filled with books that looked more decorative than read. At the far end sat a girl of about 12, shoulders hunched, fingers tangled in the strap of her backpack. Her eyes darted toward me nervously. She was the student. I exhaled. For a second, relief washed over me. Whatever this house meant, whatever fortune had built its walls, inside it sat just another child in need of help. Numbers are numbers whether you saw them in a castle or a basement. What I didn't know was that this was only the first step into a story that would test every truth I thought I knew about dignity, love, and the price of being yourself in a world that bows only to money. And then, from behind me, I heard the click of heels on marble. A voice, sharp as glass, filled the room. "So this is the tutor?" I turned, and for the first time, I saw her, the mother. The woman whose fortune every newspaper whispered about. The woman who would soon turn my entire life upside down. Got it. Here's part 2, following exactly the plan you sent. The first confrontation with the millionaire mother. She entered the room, like someone who had never once been told. "No!" Her heels struck the marble in a rhythm that reminded me of a metronome, precise and merciless. The girl looked down at her notebook, as if she'd already learned that silence was safer than answering her mother. I stood. Out of habit, out of respect. She studied me the way a jeweler studies a stone and decides, within seconds, whether it is worthless or priceless. I didn't need to hear her verdict. It was written in the slight curve of her lips, in the way her eyes lingered not on me but on my coat, threadbare at the elbows, patched once by my own clumsy stitching. "You're the tutor?" she asked. Not curious. Amused. "Yes," I answered, my voice steady. "I expected." She tilted her head, the diamonds at her ears catching the light. "Someone with a title. Professor. Doctor. Not a schoolteacher." I didn't flinch. If there is one gift poverty gives you, it is the ability to stand in the face of ridicule without shattering. "Your daughter needs help with mathematics," I said simply. "I can provide that." Her smile sharpened. "In that coat?" I could feel the heat rise in my face, but I refused to lower my eyes. She wanted me to explain myself, to apologize for existing without silk and gold. Instead, I placed my satchel on the desk, pulled out a notebook, and wrote a simple equation in neat chalky lines. "Numbers don't care about coats," I said. "They only care if you respect them enough to solve them." The silence stretched. For a moment, her expression faltered. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to see that my refusal to bend had unsettled her. The girl glanced up from the notebook, her lips parting as though she wanted to laugh but didn't dare. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of relief, maybe even admiration, that told me she had never seen an adult stand so calm before her mother's fire. The woman recovered quickly. She waved a hand, dismissive. "Fine. We'll try this experiment. But understand, I don't tolerate failure. If my daughter's grades don't improve, you'll be gone by the end of the month." I nodded. "That's fair." No apology. No gratitude. Just that. I saw her shoulders stiffen, as if she had expected me to grovel, to trip over my self-promising results. I didn't. Because, truthfully, I wasn't there to please her. I was there for the girl, sitting quietly with her pencil pressed too hard against the paper. The mother lingered another moment, her perfume hanging in the air even after she turned away. "We'll see," she murmured, and left the room. The echo of her heels faded down the corridor. The girl lifted her eyes to me then, a tiny, cautious smile playing at the corners of her lips. "She doesn't like anyone," she whispered. I almost smiled back. "Then I suppose I'm in good company." That night, as I walked home with the city wind clawing at my coat, I realized something unsettling. Her sarcasm hadn't wounded me. It had awakened me. I'd looked into the eyes of one of the wealthiest women in the city, endured her disdain, and discovered that my worth wasn't something she could measure in diamonds or dismiss with a smirk. But I also knew this. She wasn't finished testing me. And neither, God help me, was I finished answering her. The girl's name was Emily. She had the quiet look of a child taught too early that her words were fragile things, not to be wasted. On that first evening after her mother left, she sat with her shoulders curved, pencil clutched so tightly it left faint indents in her fingers. "I'm not good at math," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "That's what people say when they've only been taught to fear it. Math doesn't punish. It waits." Her brow wrinkled, like she wanted to believe, but had heard the opposite too many times. I slid the notebook closer to her, drawing simple numbers, one she already knew but had been too afraid to trust. We worked through them slowly, building brick by brick, until at last her face lit with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Discovery. That was the first stone laid. Over the following weeks, the routine formed. Each evening I walked up the marble steps, left my worn coat on the back of a chair, and sat with Emily at her desk. Numbers turned into puzzles, puzzles into victories. I refused to let her fear mistakes. Every wrong answer was simply a step closer to the right one. And slowly, she stopped whispering and started speaking. But the mother, Clara, was never far away. She drifted into the room at inconvenient moments, arms crossed, lips curved into that razor-edged smile. "Interesting," she would say. "You clap for her when she gets a problem right. Are you teaching or running a circus?" I didn't rise to it. "Encouragement is oxygen," I replied once. "Without it, even the brightest flame dies." Her eyes narrowed. "And you believe my daughter is a flame?" "She's already burning," I said calmly. "She just doesn't know it yet." For the first time, she had no reply. She turned, heels clicking sharply as she left, but I had caught the faintest flicker in her expression, like I had spoken a truth she'd been too proud to admit. Our battles became frequent. She would challenge, prod, mock. I would answer not with anger, but with steady defiance. "You don't look like a man who belongs in this house," she said one night, glancing at my coat slung across the chair. "Then it's fortunate the numbers don't care where I belong," I answered. Another time she remarked, "The agency must have been desperate, sending us someone like you." "Perhaps," I said, "but sometimes desperation makes the right choice." Each time, my refusal to bend seemed to unsettle her more than if I had begged for approval. And Emily, sweet, silent Emily, began to bloom. Her tests at school improved, her teachers wrote notes home, her laughter, tentative at first, echoed in the hallways. She still flinched when she dropped her pencil or stumbled over a problem, but when she looked up at me, she found calm instead of anger. That calm became her courage. One evening, Clara arrived unexpectedly during a session. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, as Emily solved a long division problem on her own. The girl hesitated halfway, frowning. "Take it piece by piece," I murmured. "Divide, subtract, bring down. Don't rush." Emily's lips moved as she worked. At last she placed the answer down. "Correct." Her face lit with pride. She looked at me first, not her mother, for confirmation. I nodded. "Exactly right." And then, for the first time, she looked toward Clara. Waiting. I thought Clara would dismiss it, as always. But instead, she stepped closer, eyes scanning the numbers, and after a long silence said quietly, "Correct." It was a single word, but I saw how Emily's posture lifted, how the approval she'd long hungered for finally reached her. And I saw, too, the shadow crossing Clara's face as she realized it had been me, not her expensive tutors, not her circle of elite professionals, who had unlocked her daughter's confidence. After Emily left the room, Clara lingered. The silence between us was tense, like the air before a storm. "You think you're clever," she said finally. "No," I replied. "I think your daughter is clever. I just refuse to let her forget it." Her eyes searched mine, sharp and restless, like she was trying to read the secret of why I didn't bow, why her sarcasm seemed to lose its power on me. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something almost like respect flicker there. Then she turned, her voice cool once more. "We'll see how long you last here." The door shut behind her. But I knew, as I gathered my papers and stepped once more into the cold city night, that I had already lasted longer than she expected. And with every lesson, every spark of confidence in Emily's eyes, I was planting something Clara couldn't ignore, something that unsettled her as much as it intrigued her. Because in that mansion built from wealth and power, for the first time in a long while, truth had walked in wearing a worn-out coat. And truth, unlike money, doesn't retreat. The city is full of offers disguised as gifts, and I had learned long ago that not all doors are meant to be opened. Still, when a former colleague whispered about a client, a businessman with more money than morals, who was looking for a private tutor for his son. I agreed to meet. A few extra hours might mean a paid medicine bill, or food that wasn't just bread and tea. The meeting was set in a cafe that smelled of roasted beans and ambition. The man arrived late, wearing a suit so loud it practically shouted. His first words weren't greetings but numbers. How much he could pay, how quickly he expected results, how little he cared about the process as long as his son's grades rose high enough to match the family name. When I asked about the boy himself, his interests, his fears, his struggles, the man waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Don't bother with that. Just make him pass. That's all that matters. You'll be well compensated. Triple what you earn with anyone else." Triple. The word throbbed in my ears like a temptation wrapped in gold. I pictured the medicine bottles lined on my father's nightstand, the landlord's shadow stretched across my doorway, the endless gnaw of worry that kept me awake long after midnight. But then I pictured Emily, biting her lip as she worked through fractions, eyes widening when the answer suddenly made sense. I pictured how she smiled not because numbers meant grades, but because they had finally stopped frightening her. I looked the businessman in the eye. "Your money doesn't interest me." His smirk vanished. "What? If all you want is a number printed on a piece of paper by another tutor, I'm not for sale." His jaw clenched. "You'll regret this. Perhaps. But not as much as if I betrayed the reason I became a teacher." I stood, leaving him blinking in disbelief, as though he'd never heard someone turn away from wealth. I walked out of the cafe lighter than when I had entered, even if my pockets remained just as empty. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that Clara had been there. I saw her only when I stepped onto the street. She stood a few paces away, dark glasses masking her eyes, though not the tension in her posture. For a breathless second, our gazes locked. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no sound came. And then, without a word, she turned and vanished into the waiting car that pulled up like a shadow. That night, when I arrived at the mansion, Emily was already waiting with her notebooks open, eager to show me the results of a school test she had passed with ease. I congratulated her, heart swelling with a pride that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her courage. Clara entered midway through the lesson. But this time, there was no sarcasm, no mocking tilt of the head. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded, but her silence felt different. Watchful. Curious. Emily looked up at her, holding out the test with a hopeful smile. "I got 92. For once, Clara's expression softened. She walked over, glanced at the paper, and murmured, "Well done." Emily nearly glowed at the words, clutching the paper like a treasure. But it was the glance Clara cast at me afterward that shook me more than anything. It wasn't disdain. It wasn't dismissal. It was something far more dangerous, recognition. Later, when Emily had gone upstairs, Clara lingered in the kitchen while I packed my things. The silence between us was charged, like the air before a storm. "You turned down a client today," she said abruptly. I froze. So she had been there. "I did. He offered you triple, I heard. And you refused." "Yes." Her eyes searched mine. "Why?" "Because teaching is about more than price tags. I don't teach for money, though I need it. I teach because it's the only thing I know that leaves people stronger than when I found them." For a moment, the marble walls, the chandeliers, the echo of her wealth all seemed to fade. She looked at me not as a beggar in a worn coat, but as a man who had drawn a line no money could erase. Something flickered in her eyes, something fragile and unguarded, like the brief opening of a locked door. She covered it quickly with a scoff. "You're a strange man, Mr. Tutor. Most people would have sold themselves without blinking." "Maybe," I said. But then I've never been most people. I gathered my coat and left, the night air sharp against my face. But her gaze followed me long after I stepped outside. And though she would never admit it, not yet, I knew something had shifted inside her. For the first time, Clara had stopped seeing me as just another poor man beneath her. For the first time, she had begun to see me. It began in small ways, almost invisible at first. A question tossed casually across the kitchen counter, a remark that lingered longer than it should have. Clara, who had once watched me with suspicion, now lingered more often in the background when I worked with Emily. And sometimes, after her daughter disappeared upstairs, she stayed. One night, I was rinsing the chalk dust from my hands in their endless steel sink when she appeared in the doorway. No diamonds, no sharp armor of silk. Just a simple cardigan draped across her shoulders, her hair untied for once. "Do you always work this late?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual, lacking the usual barbs. "Work is the only thing that pays on time," I replied. She tilted her head, studying me. "And yet, you refuse the kind of money most people would bleed for." I shrugged. "Money pays for bread, but principles pay for sleep. Without sleep, bread tastes like ash." For a second, her lips parted, as though she might argue. But then she laughed softly, a sound so unguarded it startled even her. "You really are impossible." The word didn't sting this time. If anything, it warmed. From then on, conversations became part of the routine. At first they were about Emily, her struggles, her progress, the way her teachers had begun to notice changes. But then, slowly, the edges widened. I learned that Clara hated cocktail parties, though she wore her most dazzling smiles at them. That she despised being called a socialite, though the magazines never used another word. She confessed, almost reluctantly, that she sometimes felt more like an actress playing the role of a billionaire widow than a woman living her own life. In return, I told her pieces of my own story. About my father, once a factory worker with calloused hands and quiet dignity, now trapped in the prison of illness. About the small apartment that smelled of damp plaster and medicine. About how I had once dreamed of building a school of my own, a place where children weren't measured against each other, but against themselves. She listened. Really listened. And when she asked questions, they weren't laced with irony, but with something else, curiosity, maybe even respect. The walls between us thinned further during walks with Emily. After a lesson, sometimes the girl would beg us to accompany her down the garden path, a winding trail lined with roses that glowed faintly in the dusk. Clara walked beside her daughter, but often her eyes drifted toward me, as though trying to read what it was in me that had somehow breathed life into the child she loved but didn't know how to reach. One evening, as Emily darted ahead chasing fireflies, Clara slowed her steps until we walked side by side. "You're different with her," she murmured. "How so?" "You don't see what everyone else sees. The name, the inheritance, the pressure." I looked at her. "Because she's not those things. She's just Emily." Her breath caught faintly, as though the simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than any lecture could. That night, after Emily was in bed, I found Clara in the kitchen again. This time she was pouring tea, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cup. "You make it sound so easy," she said suddenly. "What?" "Caring. Seeing past the walls. I've lived half my life surrounded by people, yet I've never felt more alone." For a moment, the fortress cracked. I saw not the millionaire, not the woman whose sarcasm could cut marble, but someone tired. Tired of smiling at the right cameras. Tired of being admired for everything except who she really was. I wanted to say something, anything, but the truth caught in my throat. Finally I managed, "You're not alone now." Her eyes lifted to mine, wide and unguarded, and for a heartbeat we stood there, suspended in a silence that felt like a bridge finally built. Then she looked away, hiding behind a sip of tea. "Careful, teacher," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Bridges can burn." But the warmth in her eyes betrayed her words. It started with whispers. They always do. At first, it was just a glance too long from one of the maids, a pause in the butler's voice when he said my name. Nothing concrete. Nothing spoken aloud. But the air in the mansion had changed. I could feel it clinging to the marble like dust. Then the papers arrived. Not the serious ones. No, those were too careful to touch such a scandal directly. But the glossy weeklies, the gossip columns fed by shadows. The city's most eligible widow seen too often with her daughter's humble tutor. One even printed a photograph of me stepping out of the gates, coat flapping like a banner of poverty against the backdrop of wealth. I didn't need to read the words to know their poison. The headlines were always the same: forbidden affection, scandal in the mansion, widow breaks convention. Clara's world, polished and cruel, thrives on reputation the way lungs thrive on air. And reputation, once cracked, spreads its fracture lines faster than any truth. I saw it in her eyes the moment the first magazine landed on her desk. She didn't say anything, but her fingers tightened on the glossy paper until it bent. For a woman who had once mocked my coat, the thought of becoming the object of ridicule herself was unbearable. That night, she confronted me in the study, her voice sharp but her eyes unsteady. "Do you understand what they're saying?" "Yes," I answered quietly. "They'll destroy me, my standing, Emily's future. All because you couldn't simply teach and leave." Her words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they were half true. I had stayed longer than I should, let myself believe that the walls around her heart were meant to be climbed. "Clara," I said, forcing calm into my voice, "rumors are only as strong as the truth we give them." She laughed bitterly. "You think truth matters to them? In this world, perception is everything. And perception says I've thrown away my dignity for a man who can barely afford his rent." Her words stung. Not because of the money. I'd long ago made peace with my poverty, but because I saw the fear behind them. Fear of losing control, fear of becoming the target instead of the victor. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the streets until dawn, the city lights blurring into rivers of gold I couldn't touch. Every step carried the same conclusion closer to me. I was poison in her world. Every look, every whisper, every cruel smile aimed at her came because of me. So the next day, after the lesson, I stayed behind while Emily packed her books. My heart thudded like a drum as I waited for Clara. When she appeared in the doorway, I spoke before she could. "I'm leaving." She froze. "What?" Whatever this is between us. It hurts you more than it helps. Your world won't forgive it. And I won't be the man who ruins your name." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. She turned her head sharply, hiding the tremor in her eyes. "If that's what you want," she said at last, voice tight, "it's what you need." I gathered my satchel, each movement heavier than the last. When I reached the door, Emily's voice called from the stairs. "You'll come back tomorrow, won't you?" I couldn't answer. If I had turned, if I had seen her eyes, I would have broken. Instead, I stepped into the night and let the gates close behind me with the finality of chains. For the first time, I walked away not from poverty, not from temptation, but from love itself. And God help me, it felt like tearing my own heart out. Days without the mansion stretched like winters. My evenings became silent again. No Emily's questions, no Clara's voice cutting through the air like glass and fire. Only the slow tick of the clock in my cramped apartment and the rustle of my father's cough behind the bedroom wall. I told myself I had done the right thing. That leaving had spared Clara humiliation, spared Emily confusion, spared myself a ruin I couldn't afford. But truth has a cruel habit of echoing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face on the stairs, waiting for a promise I couldn't give. And behind her, Clara's silhouette, rigid but trembling, as though she was forcing herself not to run after me. 2 weeks passed. Then came the note. It was folded neatly, slipped under my apartment door like a secret too heavy for mail. The handwriting was careful, the kind that belongs to a child still learning the art of letters. Please come to the library Saturday. 4 o'clock. Don't tell Mother. Signed, Emily. I should have ignored it. I told myself that a dozen times. But Saturday found me standing outside that familiar mansion again, heart hammering against ribs like it wanted out. The maid opened the door with the faintest flicker of recognition, but said nothing. She simply pointed me toward the library. The room was dim, curtains drawn, the smell of polished wood heavy in the air. And there, standing by the tall window, was Clara. Not Emily. For a moment neither of us spoke. She turned slowly, her eyes storm-dark, her lips pressed into a line as though she had rehearsed 100 speeches and forgotten them all at once. Emily, she said finally, her voice low, has decided she's a matchmaker now. She lured you here. I swallowed hard. Then I'll go. No. Her voice broke sharper than she intended. She stepped forward, hands trembling despite the control in her posture. Stay. Please. The word, please, was a crack in the marble of her pride. I stayed. She drew a breath, and for the first time since I had known her, her eyes softened not with mockery, not with calculation, but with fear. Fear of speaking what she had buried, fear of losing what she had never admitted she wanted. I don't know when it happened, she whispered. I don't know how. But you walked into my house with that ridiculous coat, and you refused to bow. You saw Emily when everyone else saw a fortune. And then you saw me. Her voice caught, as though the words were knives dragged across her throat. I hated it. I hated how it made me feel. Vulnerable. Human. And when the world started whispering, I thought I could silence it by silencing you. But I couldn't. She looked up then, and her eyes burned. Because I love you. Against my reason, against my pride, against everything I built to protect myself. I love you. The room spun. I had imagined those words in secret, whispered them to myself in the dark. But hearing them from her lips was like watching the earth itself break open. I stepped closer, until the distance between us was a breath. Clara, I said, my own voice unsteady, I don't love you for your money. I love you despite it. I love you because behind the armor, there is a woman who is stronger than her world but too tired to admit it. For a heartbeat we just stood there, staring, both trembling, both silent. And then, suddenly, fiercely, she pulled me toward her. Her lips met mine in a kiss that was not polished, not careful, but raw and desperate and real. It tasted of pride breaking, of walls collapsing, of freedom stolen back from fear. My hands rose to her shoulders, and for the first time, the distance that had haunted us was gone. When we broke apart, her forehead rested against mine, her breath unsteady. Now you know, she whispered. Behind the door, I thought I heard the faintest giggle, the sound of a child victorious in her plan. But I didn't move. Neither did Clara. For that one moment, the whispers, the world, the weight of society all fell away. There was only us. The rumors didn't die. They never do. By the time the kiss still burned on my lips, the city's society pages had already sharpened their knives. Dinners buzzed with whispers, champagne glasses tilted over sly smiles. The widow has lost her mind. The tutor has bewitched her. It won't last. But for once, Clara didn't retreat. She walked into her world, those glittering halls of chandeliers and masks, with her head high and her hand in mine. Gasps rippled, cameras flashed like lightning, and every eye turned to us as if scandal itself had entered the room. I waited for her to let go, to step aside, to save herself from the avalanche of judgment. Instead, she tightened her grip. Her voice rang through the hush like a blade cutting silk. "Yes," she said, "this is the man I choose. Not because of wealth, not because of name, but because when every other voice in my life lied, his told the truth. It was her declaration of war. Against gossip, against expectation, against the prison of reputation. And I, poor schoolteacher in a worn coat, stood beside her like the richest man alive. The fallout was swift. Invitations vanished, alliances cooled. Friends evaporated like smoke. But Clara only grew freer. She laughed more, smiled more. At night, when we walked the halls of the mansion together, it no longer felt like a museum of cold trophies, but a home, alive with the sound of Emily's joy. And then came the gift I never expected. One evening she led me to a small building near the edge of her estate, windows boarded, roof sagging. "This," she said softly, "is yours." I frowned. "What do you mean? You once told me your dream. A school, not for grades or reputations, but for children to find themselves. You gave my daughter that gift already. Now give it to others." I opened the door. Inside, dust swirled through beams of fading light, but I could already see it. Rows of desks, chalkboards filled with equations and drawings, a place where no child was judged by the size of their parents' fortune. My throat closed. "Clara, I can't." "You can," she interrupted gently. "And you will. This isn't charity. It's faith. Faith in the man I love." The word struck deeper than any fortune could. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. Not alone, but with her. That night, as the three of us sat in the garden, Emily between us chasing fireflies, Clara's hand resting in mine, I realized the truth. We hadn't just found each other. We had found what the world, with all its gold and gossip, had denied us. Something real. Something unshakable. Love not bought. Love not bargained. Love chosen against every odd. And in that choice, we were free. The end.